Welcome back, everyone. This will be my full Marvel Moon Knight Episode 4 video. There were a bunch of Easter eggs and references. We'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. We're doing a giveaway for Disney Plus memberships. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and just leave your favorite moment from the episode on the video. Careful for spoilers from the episode. If you haven't seen it yet, we'll just start at the beginning and talk about WTF moments and Easter eggs as we go along, starting with the episode title, The Tomb. Obviously a reference to Ammit's tomb that Khonshu and the other gods locked her earthly remains in 2,000 years ago. That's also around the same time that they decided that they would leave the MCU dimension, they would leave the third dimension and go to that pocket dimension called the Overvoid. It's also when Khonshu was banished from the presence of the other gods. He was still forced to leave the earthly dimension, but he disagreed with them leaving. He wanted to stay on Earth and continue to exact his vengeance the way that he saw fit. But there's a big Easter egg here too in this opening scene. A lot of you probably sense this. It's just like the Black Panther movie. It's an upside down shot, and just like the Black Panther movie, they do a reverse spin, except this time it's Osiris's avatar placing Khonshu's statue in his stone prison on a shelf with many other similar stone figures, sort of foreshadowing what happened with Ammit's remains that we learn later in the episode. Remember, Osiris's avatar said that many other gods were trapped in this place in the same way. That's what all the other stone figures are. They're other god-tier characters that are part of Khonshu's pantheon. They just weren't necessarily part of the ruling council, the Ennead. The Ennead itself, like the ones that we saw at the trial, was only part of them, but they're only meant to be the ruling council over a much larger group of gods that Khonshu is part of. Then they pick up with Steven and Layla in the aftermath of episode 3, just immediately after what had happened, and they show you Layla getting her Indiana Jones on, because it's still Steven, and for most of this first action scene, he's passed out because of what happened with Khonshu and the other gods. It's a very Indiana Jones-esque kind of episode, and she is an Indiana Jones figure inside the MCU, so they just want to show you that she can actually hold her own in a regular fight, and they're fighting Arthur Harrow's men. It's not like superheroes fighting other superheroes. We'll get to that in later episodes. Like, there is a trailer shot, probably from either episode 5 or episode 6, where you see Moon Knight and Arthur Harrow both using their god-tier power, rushing at each other. So eventually, just like Marvel movies, it will work back up to that place where you see gods versus gods. There's an extended scene of Steven basically explaining what's been going on with Mark Spector this whole time, and they kind of have this funny subplot with him falling in love with Layla. And remember, he's meant to be a different personality, so he's kind of meeting Layla for the first time, and he explains what their deal was. Mark said that he was going to go away forever, but that was meant to be after they defeated Arthur Harrow and Ammit, which they haven't done yet, so that's why Mark doesn't want to go away yet. So a lot of the episode goes back to that Mark versus Steven place that they were in the first couple of episodes, with Steven not wanting to have anything to do with Mark. But they have started to work with each other a little bit more, and by the end of the episode, they do hug each other at the sight of each other. I will explain that too, because it's all right out of the comics. As trippy as the ending scene, there is a very logical comic book explainer. It all makes sense, don't worry. Steven punching himself in his own face, though, is just to show you how Mark does have limited control of their body, even though he's technically not supposed to be in control of the body. Steven could do the exact same thing, too, if he were the one that were stuck inside. It's meant to be kind of a parallel for the way that Khonshu has limited ability to physically interact with the MCU unless he has his avatar with him. The same is true for all of the other gods, too. Like, they have a very limited ability to act on the MCU while they're trapped inside this pocket dimension. The goat that they pass along the riverbed as they're making their way to Ammit's tomb is meant to be a representation of the Egyptian god Khnum, who had the head of a ram and was the god of the source of the Nile, because they're literally walking along a riverbed. When Steven starts yelling about Layla being the one to take care of them when they go into the tomb, you see the bloody tool on the ground. That's just meant to show you that Layla had just killed one of Arthur Harrow's men, just to show you that she was capable. And Steven not knowing any kind of common caving techniques is another example of the DID that they suffer from. Even though it's the same brain, technically, and all that knowledge should be in there, different personalities inside his head don't have access to all the same information. That's why Steven is the Egyptian history nerd, Mark is the hardcore mercenary with the fighting skills, and it sounds like from the events of episode 3, Jake Lockley is the stabby one. There are also some Jake Lockley references in the mental hospital later in the episode 2 that I'll explain. But it's another way to show you why they'll have to eventually come to an agreement, like the personalities will all stick around and they'll start working together in a better way to become a more complete superhero. When he mentions being excited to answer a riddle at the mouth of the cave when they look around the ancient paintings, he's talking about the riddle of the Sphinx. There was actually a big connection to Kang the Conqueror in the Sphinx in the Loki series to what's happening on Moon Knight right now. I just did a big Kang the Conqueror video, so I'll link that in the description below. But when Kang first mastered time travel, or He Who Remains, depending on which variant you're talking about, most of them did a lot of the same things. He took the name Rama-Tut using his time machine to travel back to ancient Egypt and convince everyone to worship him instead of the old gods. That's one of the major reasons that they cite in episode 1 for the Great Rift, the reason humanity eventually would turn away from the old gods, Khonshu's pantheon, and why they chose to leave the MCU. Blame it all on Kang, just took a couple thousand years for that to set in. But that's why you saw the Sphinx in the Great Pyramid during Loki episode 5. That was from a different timeline that didn't go the way that Kang wanted it to go, so that's why it wound up on that planet. Then when they're actually trying to find Ammit, they learn all these really cool details and facts about the actual tomb. The tomb is a maze, but it's built to look like the Eye of Horus because of its representation in the Egyptian pantheon, the way it represented protection in the afterlife, protection against Ammit, because remember, the avatar who built the tomb, which we find out was the pharaoh at the time, and it was Alexander the Great. That's right, MCU Alexander the Great was the avatar of Ammit once upon a time. The reason why he would invoke protection against Ammit would be because he sided with the other gods rebelling against Ammit. Remember, Arthur Harrow told that big backstory. Her avatar rebelled against her and helped entomb her 2,000 years ago. They're also trying to backdoor explain why Alexander the Great was able to conquer the known world at the time, because as an avatar, he had the powers of one of the gods. Him explaining what the Eye of Horus is meant to represent is also meant to set up the end of the episode because the eye itself sort of represents the mind space. As he talks about the 6 senses, there are also 6 Infinity Stones, but it sits at the end of the episode where Mark literally travels into his own mind space. Don't worry, we'll get to that too. That's part of a big comic book run that a lot of you might remember if you're big Moon Knight fans. The first tomb that they find is covered in blood with all the fresh canopic jars, like someone's been freshly mummified here, and we see it happen again later, like multiple people are being entombed here. That belongs to one of the guards that was mummified here, left to protect the pharaoh, who we then find is Alexander the Great. So talk about Easter eggs for the Mummy movies. Arthur Harrow's men sort of activated these protection measures, which resurrected the mummy here, which has gone about trying to kill all the men slowly. The Ustabi figure that Steven talks about, the figure that Ammit is bound to, is exactly like the figure that Khonshu is bound to. They're just saying that the same thing that happened to Khonshu happened to Ammit 2,000 years ago. Layla has this extended Indiana Jones type scene with all the traditional traps you would expect as she's trying to escape this mummy. They even have a classic jump scare, talk about horror films. Can't wait to see all the Sam Raimi horror Easter eggs during Doctor Strange 2. But then they reveal that Steven has in fact found the former Avatar's tomb. They reveal it is Alexander the Great of the MCU. Like I said, 2,000 years ago, he helped rebel, siding with the other gods against Ammit when he learned what she was planning to do, judge the entire MCU. All the historical details that Steven tells about him are meant to be true. The only fake stuff that they add in is all the Marvel stuff about him being an avatar and the real gods of the MCU. But as he foreshadowed earlier, they travel to the tongue within the maze. The actual stone figure containing Ammit's essence is stored literally in Alexander the Great's mouth because he was her voice. Ha ha, see what they did there. Whoever wound up mummifying Alexander the Great 2,000 plus years ago had a sense of humor. But they have this whole side story going on while this is happening with Layla learning about her father, and they're basically doing a version of Mark Spector's original comic book story, the original Moon Knight backstory. The person that really wound up killing her father was a version of Bushman. I think he might actually wind up being a character on the TV show, but Mark Spector was a mercenary. He actually was doing shady things to earn money working with Bushman, but Bushman going off the rails is exactly what they say during the episode. He rebelled against him and then got shot, died himself, and then was brought back to life because he made the bargain with Khonshu. Like he said, I was supposed to die that night, but I didn't. That's because that's the night that he became Moon Knight. The big twist between them, though, is Layla revealing that that night is the first night that she met Mark Spector. So, like, he had literally just become Moon Knight when they met for the first time. I think what they're trying to set up is a redemption arc for Mark Spector, as well as a redemption arc for Khonshu. Like, they're on parallel arcs. So Khonshu is trying to redeem himself in the eyes of the other gods. Like, look, I'm telling the truth. I'm not such a dirtbag. Mark Spector is trying to redeem himself for all the terrible things that he did, Tony Stark, Iron Man style. So remember Iron Man's backstory in the MCU. He sold weapons to the highest bidder, he was a war profiteer, but eventually he became a superhero, decided to use his powers and his intellect for good. The same thing has kind of happened with Mark Spector. Like, he's trying to redeem himself for all the terrible things that he did as a mercenary, using the powers of Khonshu to become a superhero. The funny thing in the comics is that he actually does become a millionaire because of all the money he earns illicitly working as a mercenary. So you can make the billionaire playboy philanthropist joke about Moon Knight, except Moon Knight is just meant to be a much darker character. Then I know there's a billion questions about this whole end of the episode where he falls into the water and then you wind up inside this mental hospital. Arthur Harrow winds up getting him a couple times in the chest. Notice they're body shots, they're not headshots. But one of Khonshu's biggest powers in the comics is literally just resurrection. Mark Spector dies multiple times after becoming Moon Knight, and each time Khonshu just brings him back like it's no big deal. But when he falls into the water, what's going on with this fake Indiana Jones looking TV show is that it's meant to be a representation of his Stephen Grant personality, but the reason why it's a VHS tape is because they're trying to hint that it has been around since he was a child when VHS was still common. Some of you are probably old enough to remember buying VHSs at the store back during the 90s. That's basically what they're saying here, that the Stephen Grant personality, even the Jake Lockley personality maybe, has also been around this entire time since he was a child. But the whole idea with this mental hospital is this is right out of the Moon Knight comic book run, and the way they presented it in the comics is fairly similar to what the TV show's doing with it. Mark Spector got so messed up in the head, he found himself in this mental hospital, and he couldn't tell whether or not he just dreamt up Moon Knight, or if Moon Knight created him, who came first, who was the real personality. And he wound up seeing a lot of familiar things and artifacts, objects from his recent life, things that represented things from his real life. That's why there's the goldfish here, there's the picture of Khonshu, there's the Egyptian drawings, there's even a version of Crowley, that's the old man here, he's just not wearing the gold makeup. There's his boss, Donna, sitting in the chair. There are cupcakes from his car chase, and the orderly is Beck from episode 3. Behind Beck, behind the cupcakes, is the daily schedule on this board. On it reads bingo, which they're in the middle of during this mental hospital. The other events on the list are references to events that have been happening in real life recently. You notice the police officers, Billy and Bobby, that he saw during episode 2. There's even a real-life Moon Knight action figure. And when the version of Layla says that they've changed the movie 5 times this week, and that's a lot, that's a reference to all the different personalities from the comics. There's up to 5 different personalities in the comics. There's Mark Spector, there's Moon Knight, Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and Mr. Knight. I don't know if they're going to do every single different personality on the TV show, because Mr. Knight, for example, in the comics was a totally different personality, but on the TV show, it's just Stephen wearing a version of the Moon Knight suit. The only alternate personality that they've definitely confirmed we'll probably see is Jake Lockley. But in the comics, what he wound up finding out is that this was all happening inside his head, and it was just a scenario that Khonshu created to help him figure everything out. And then eventually he was able to come to an agreement with his other personalities, figure out who he was, and then come back to the real world. But it was all happening inside his head, which is basically what's happening inside the episode here. That's why Mark and Stephen can interact with each other physically, like they can reach out and touch each other. There's a version of Jake Lockley that looks like he's physically going to bust out of that sarcophagus, and they can see the true form of the Egyptian hippo goddess. The bingo cards they keep referencing in the episode are probably a reference to him eventually hitting bingo when he reconciles everything. Like they'll say bingo, and he'll come back out into the real world. If you watch the Legion TV series, this is just like that. Like Legion thought that he was crazy for a long time, but then he wound up finding out that in a lot of cases, the mental hospital was all just a creation inside his head. So even though Arthur Harrow seems like he's meant to be this evil psychiatrist figure in this scenario, Arthur Harrow himself is not controlling this scenario. This is all happening inside Stephen Grant's head. He's the one that has all the power. He just doesn't realize it yet. You notice when he's inside his office, the office itself is like a white version of his evil lair from episode 2. You also see statues and figurines of all the other gods in the background. When the guards bust in, you notice one of the guards is literally one of the people we just saw getting mummified while he was alive, just to kind of remind you, oh, this is actually happening inside his head. This isn't happening in the real world. When he talks about the villain and the tree having to exist in the light and the dark at the same time, that's a reference to the way that the MCU gods exist in this precarious balance between light gods and dark gods. Like there are evil gods and good gods. All of them are necessary for each other to exist in this sort of precarious balance, and they police each other, so to speak. But it's not a very equitable situation, which is where you get to the events of Thor: Love and Thunder, where Gorr the God Butcher is like, screw them all, kill all the gods, they're more trouble than they're worth. They don't care about any of us. I just did a whole bunch of Thor: Love and Thunder trailer videos, so I'll link that at the end of this as well. Yes, Gorr the God Butcher would be after Khonshu and the rest of his brothers and sisters that are part of his pantheon. The thing with Gorr going after the other gods that are part of Khonshu's pantheon eventually is it's just like Gorr's mission in the comics. He starts small and then works up, becomes more and more powerful, and is able to kill the more powerful gods, because not all MCU gods are created equal. Even though the Necrosword gives him this cosmic power, eventually he winds up using some of the gods along the way to attain even more power. Like eventually he forces the god of bombs to create a giant god bomb for him so that he can kill many of the gods at the same time. He also kills a group of gods that are gods of time that allow him to time travel to the beginning of time and absorb all this cosmic power, so that in his version of the timeline, the gods were never created, he absorbed all that power, and he thinks that'll give him the ability to completely get rid of the gods, but at a certain point it becomes hubris, but you get the idea. He becomes more and more powerful, so eventually he would gain enough cosmic power, killing enough gods, to travel to alternate dimensions. So unless your name is the one above all, theoretically in the MCU, no god will ultimately be safe unless Thor is able to stop him during the events of the movie. When he references the lunar god, he's talking about Khonshu because Khonshu is the Egyptian god of the moon, in addition to being the god of vengeance. He sees a painting representing that German town that Arthur Harrow controlled during episode 1. Then he starts seeing the different tombs representing the different personalities inside his head that are trying to break out. There could be more. I mean, Jake Lockley is the only one that bangs but doesn't quite get out. We'll probably see him in episode 5 or episode 6. But like I said, the reason why they open that last door and they're actually seeing the true depiction of the Egyptian hippo goddess, her name is Taweret. He was referencing her during episode 1 when he was talking about all the different plushy figures of the gods. She's also part of Khonshu's pantheon, and she's also listed for the next couple of episodes, so that means we'll probably see more of the actual gods in the next couple of episodes. But like I said, the reason why both of them are able to see her, and like they're all in the same space together, is because the MCU gods can only appear in people's minds because they're trapped outside the MCU dimension. If they were in the real world, Steven or Mark or any of the other personalities would not be able to see her. I think part of the idea, though, is that at the beginning of episode 5, he'll still be in the hospital and he'll talk to this hippo goddess who will explain to him what's really going on, and he'll start to realize and then eventually break back out into the real world. Also, another cool Easter egg you may have spotted if you keep watching the end credit scene. Even though it seems like they're the same in every single episode, there are some minor changes episode to episode. During each episode, in the end credit scene, the moon becomes more and more full. I think when we get to the finale, it'll reach full moon status, and it's just meant to be a reference to things on the show getting crazier and crazier episode to episode as the moon gets more and more full. But if you spotted any other big Easter eggs in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. It was actually a pretty solid episode. I really like it when it gets trippy like this. Legion was a lot of fun too. If you're a big fan of this kind of stuff, watch the Legion TV series. My episode 5 trailer video will post next, and my full Moon Knight episode 5 video will post next week after they release it. Everyone click here for my full Thor Love and Thunder trailer video to learn more about the MCU gods, and click here for my brand new Rune King Thor video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.